For decades, J.D. Crowe was more than a musician. He was a cornerstone of bluegrass, an innovator, a perfectionist, a man whose banjo shaped the sound of America. Fans saw him as quiet, humble, even mysterious. But behind that calm smile was a story few dared to whisper. A story that begins with strange disappearances, sealed letters, a fire that no one investigated, and ends with a discovery so disturbing it could rewrite everything we thought we knew about this legendary figure. Because the truth about J.D. Crowe didn't come out on stage. It was hidden in shadows, buried in a notebook, locked inside an old truck, and captured on a single reel of audio tape. This is the story of the bluegrass icon and the secret he took to his grave. J.D. Crowe's story begins long before the headlines, long before the whispers. It begins in the rolling hills of Lexington, Kentucky in 1937, a time when bluegrass was still finding its voice. His childhood was quiet, almost uneventful, except for one detail: a relentless curiosity for sound. Neighbors remember a boy who didn't just listen to music, he dissected it. He'd spend hours on the porch tapping rhythms on wood planks, turning everyday noises into patterns that only he seemed to understand. By the age of 12, that obsession had taken form. Lacking money for a real instrument, J.D. scavenged parts from broken radios, old metal pans, anything that could resonate, and built his first banjo by hand. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And the sound, rough, raw, but alive, marked the start of something no one could have predicted. Then came the lightning strike. Earl Scruggs. The first time Crowe heard those rolling three-finger banjo runs on the radio, it was as if someone had thrown open a door in his mind. "It hit me like a thunderbolt," he would later say. From that moment, every waking hour revolved around mastering that style, not just copying it, but internalizing it until it felt like second nature. By 13, J.D. was performing live on local radio stations, his youth disguised by a confidence that startled older musicians. Word spread quickly. He wasn't just good, he was precise, relentless, and hungry. That hunger earned him a life-changing invitation in 1954 to join Jimmy Martin's Sunny Mountain Boys. For most, this would have been a dream. For J.D., it was a proving ground. Martin was a legend, but also a tyrant. He demanded perfection under the glare of stage lights, berated musicians for a single missed beat, and fired players without warning. But J.D. didn't flinch. He endured every cutting word, every grueling rehearsal, absorbing lessons that would shape the rest of his career. Timing, tone, presence, how to make an audience lean forward in their seats without saying a word. What Crowe lacked in chatter, he compensated for in sound. His playing wasn't loud or showy, but it had weight. A fellow musician once said, "When J.D. played, you didn't just hear it, you felt it in your bones." That quiet mastery would become his signature. By the late 1960s, Crowe stepped out of the shadows to lead. He formed the Kentucky Mountain Boys, assembling a lineup that would later evolve into the New South, a band that didn't just honor tradition, but dared to challenge it. Their 1975 self-titled album for Rounder Records was more than a collection of songs. It was a manifesto. Traditional banjo riffs met the pulse of electric bass, the drive of drums, and the polish of country fusion. For some purists, it was heresy. For others, it was genius. Either way, it changed bluegrass forever. And yet, even as the music soared, Crowe stayed grounded, or so everyone believed. He dodged interviews, avoided the spotlight, offered only clipped quotes when pressed. Fans chalked it up to shyness. Friends called him private. But in hindsight, those silences seem heavier, like spaces where words should have been, but weren't. Because behind those silences, something was already taking shape. Something no one saw coming. By the dawn of the 1980s, J.D. Crowe stood at the pinnacle of bluegrass. His band, the New South, wasn't just successful, it was redefining the genre. Every festival wanted him. Every aspiring picker dreamed of standing in his shadow. And then, without warning, he vanished. Not in the literal sense. Crowe didn't disappear from the earth, but from the stage, the radio waves, the rhythm of public life. In 1981, right as his influence reached its peak, he walked away. There was no farewell tour, no tearful announcement, no elegant exit interview, just silence. For nearly 5 years, an eternity in the music world, J.D. Crowe was a ghost. Festival organizers who once booked him months in advance found their calls going unanswered. Invitations were met with curt declines. Studio sessions were canceled without explanation. Fans wrote letters, some begging, others accusing him of arrogance. Few received a reply, and those who did said the tone was distant. Rumors, of course, filled the void. Some claimed he was exhausted from decades on the road. Others swore he was sick. A few whispered about a nervous breakdown. None of these theories stuck. There were no hospital stays, no public sightings of a frail or broken man. In fact, those who glimpsed him around Lexington during those missing years said he looked strong, composed, if a little withdrawn. But under the surface, odd details began to surface. A fire broke out on Crowe's Kentucky property in late 1982, one so localized and mysterious that locals still talk about it. The official report was a single paragraph, vague and incomplete. No photographs, no follow-up investigation. What was known is that the woods behind his cabin were cordoned off for weeks afterward, and neighbors recalled a persistent smell of smoke long after the fire was contained. Then there was the truck. In 1983, an abandoned Ford pickup, registered to J.D. Crowe, turned up on a rural stretch of highway in Tennessee, stripped down to metal. Inside, investigators found nothing except a torn scrap of lined paper wedged under the passenger seat. On it were 5 words, written in a rushed, slanted hand. "I told you not to follow me." No signature, no context, and perhaps most unsettling, no record of who reported the vehicle or why it was never logged as stolen. To the outside world, Crowe's absence was an enigma. But to those closest to him, small cracks were showing. A former bandmate would later admit he wasn't just tired, he was different, on edge, always looking over his shoulder. Whatever drove J.D. Crowe off the stage wasn't fatigue, it wasn't illness. It was something heavier, something he wasn't willing or able to explain. And before long, that something would collide with a name most bluegrass fans had never heard before. Thomas Rivers. July 1984. Nashville, Tennessee. The New South was scheduled for a midsummer gig, a rare appearance during Crowe's self-imposed exile. To fans, it seemed like a small miracle. For one teenager, it was everything. Thomas "Tommy" Rivers was 19 years old, a college student from Knoxville with calloused fingers and big dreams. He wasn't just a fan, he was a disciple. His friends joked that he spoke of J.D. Crowe the way others spoke about preachers. Tommy studied every note, every roll, every pause in Crowe's playing, and when a mutual acquaintance pulled strings to get him backstage access that night, he was ecstatic. He showed up with his banjo case slung over his shoulder and a cassette recorder in his pocket, a hopeful student ready to ask his hero for a few words of wisdom. What happened next has never been fully explained. Witnesses saw Tommy laughing, wide-eyed, soaking up the electric hum of pre-show energy. But later, behind the venue's trailer, that excitement turned into something else. According to 2 separate statements, Tommy and Crowe were seen in a heated exchange. The subject? A tape. One roadie remembered catching fragments, something about not supposed to have it, and you need to give it back. That was the last time anyone saw Tommy Rivers alive. Hours later, his car was still parked where he left it. Inside, a wallet, a set of car keys, and the banjo he wouldn't have willingly abandoned. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away from the lot, just a boy swallowed whole by the night. The police questioned J.D. Crowe briefly. His response was curt. "Lot of kids come backstage, I don't keep track." When asked about the argument, Crowe denied it ever happened. With no body and no physical evidence, the case stalled almost immediately. For Tommy's parents, it was a lifetime sentence of waiting. They drove to Nashville every week for months, plastering flyers on street poles, calling radio stations, begging for leads. None came. The boy who once filled their home with banjo runs was gone, leaving behind only silence and an unspoken question. Why? For years, the disappearance of Tommy Rivers was a footnote in police archives, unsolved, unread, and largely forgotten outside his family's circle of grief, until a leather-bound notebook surfaced nearly 40 years later and turned that old cold case into something far more sinister. It began with an ordinary estate auction in 2022, a scattering of old tools, a sun-faded cowboy hat, and a weathered leather notebook that smelled faintly of smoke. When antique dealer Grace Collier flipped open the brass clasp, she thought it was a musician's keepsake, filled with chord progressions and set lists from decades past. And at first, it was. Pages mapped out banjo tunings in neat, deliberate handwriting. Familiar song titles sprawled across the margins. Then, halfway through, the tone shifted. The handwriting grew frantic, the spacing uneven, like someone writing in a rush or in fear. One entry dated October 7, 1982, read, "Still watching, same car, same time every night. He's getting bolder." Another, marked December 6th, "Can't tell if it's real or not, but I know what I saw." And then, just days before the fire on Crowe's Kentucky property, a chilling line in single slanted strokes, "He was in the house." The deeper Grace read, the darker it became. These weren't the ramblings of a musician worried about a missed chord. These were fragments of paranoia or prophecy. And at the very back of the journal, taped against the inside cover with brittle yellow tape, was something worse. A grainy black and white photograph. It showed a lone figure standing among trees, face obscured by shadow, posture rigid. Underneath, written in shaky pencil, "Not me." Experts authenticated everything. The handwriting matched Crowe's early letters, the ink composition traced back to the correct decade, even the tape was period accurate. This was real. But perhaps most unsettling was what wasn't there. 10 full pages had been torn out, ripped clean from the spine. Whoever removed them didn't want anyone to know what they said. When news of the journal leaked online, the bluegrass world erupted. Was this the rambling of a man battling mental collapse, or a record of something far more tangible, something tied to Tommy Rivers' disappearance? The dates were too close to ignore. And yet, as disturbing as the journal was, it was only the first crack in a wall of silence. Because not long after, in a dusty, mislabeled studio box, investigators uncovered something even more damning, a reel of tape. It was found in a mislabeled studio box, buried in an old Rounder Records archive. When investigators played it, the voice was unmistakable, calm at first, almost tender. Then a pause, a breath, and finally 5 words that detonated everything. "I couldn't let him leave." Forensic analysts confirmed it. The voice belonged to J.D. Crowe. The reaction was immediate and violent. The Crowe estate hired lawyers, issued takedowns, called the tape fake. Rounder Records stayed silent. Promoters refused interviews. Former bandmates vanished from social media. Privately, some spoke. A sound engineer remembered that night. "He told me to take the night off, said he needed the room alone." Another recalled a 2 a.m. call after the fire. He said, "Don't ask questions, I'm fine." But he didn't sound fine. He sounded like someone who'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. Meanwhile, whispers of an industry-wide cover-up grew louder. Festival promoters admitted to pulling segments that asked hard questions. A journalist claimed their 1992 exposé was killed by an editor who said, "It's not our place to dig into that. Let the man play." Why protect him? Because J.D. Crowe wasn't just an artist, he was an economy. If he fell, bluegrass took a hit, and so they let the silence hold. For 40 years. Before he died, J.D. left behind a sealed envelope. Inside, one sentence. "There are truths I will take to the grave, not out of pride, but protection. Do not let the music suffer because of the man." But maybe the music already had. To this day, Tommy Rivers has never been found. His parents, now in their 70s, still leave the porch light on, just in case. J.D. Crowe returned to the stage after his disappearance, but those who knew him say something was gone. The fire in his playing dimmed. The old cabin songs vanished from his set lists. And he never spoke about the missing years. Not once. The man who gave bluegrass some of its brightest notes now leaves behind its darkest questions. Was he a genius, a ghost, or both? Because the truth about J.D. Crowe isn't just about what he did, it's about what we let him get away with. And in the end, silence isn't empty. It echoes. If this story has you questioning everything you thought you knew about bluegrass, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching.